theology has some tests. Let me give you
That's interesting.
3 examples.
Yes.
It turns out that my book already inspired a PhD student at Harvard in the English department to pursue a PhD in that direction. And she invited me to the PhD exam a couple of months ago. And in the exam, one of the examiners, a professor, asked her, "Do you know why Giordano Bruno was burnt at the stake?" And she said, "No, I think it's because he was an obnoxious guy and irritated a lot of people."
Yes.
Which is true. But the professor said, "No, it's because Giordano Bruno said that other stars are just like the sun, and they could have a planet like the Earth around them that could host life." And that was offensive to the church. Why was it offensive? Because there is the possibility that this life sinned. Okay? And if that life sinned on planets around other stars, it should have been saved by Christ. And then you need multiple copies of Christ. And that's unacceptable. How can you have duplicates of Christ?
Right.
And so they burned the guy.
So it was about that's okay. I'm just like loading this all in because that's kind of brilliant. So he was actually already into it's not just about the stars, it's anticipating that there could be other life forms.
Yeah.
Like why if there's other stars, why would it be special? Why would our star be special?
He was making the right argument.
And he would just follow that all along to say like there should be other Earth-like places, there should be other life forms.
And then that
there
was
needs
offensive.
to be copies of Christ.
Yeah, so that was offensive. So I said to that professor, I said, "Great, I wanted to introduce some scientific tone to the discussion."
Yes.
And I said, "This is great because now you basically laid the foundation for an experimental test of this theology."
Yes.
What is the test? We now know that other stars are like the sun. And we know they have planets like the Earth around them. So suppose we find life there and we figure out that they sinned. Then we ask them, "Did you witness Christ?" Mm-hmm. And if they say no, it means that this theology is ruled out. So there is an experimental test. So this is experimental test number 1. Another experimental test, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, Abraham heard the voice of God to sacrifice his son, right? Only son. And that's what the story says. Now, suppose Abraham, my name, by the way, had a voice memo up on his cell phone.
Yes.
He could have pressed this up and recorded the voice of God. Yeah. And that would have been experimental evidence that God exists, right? Fortunately, he didn't. But it's an experimental test, right? There is a third example I should tell, and that is Elie Wiesel attributed this story to Martin Buber, but it's not clear whether it's true or not. At any event, the story goes that Martin Buber, he was a philosopher, and he said, the Christians argue that Jesus, the Messiah arrived already and will come back again in the future. The Jews argue the Messiah never came and will arrive in the future. So he said, why argue? Both sides agree that the Messiah will arrive in the future. When the Messiah arrives, we can ask whether he or she came before, like visited us, and then figure it out. And one side, so again, experimental test of a theology.
Yes.
So even theology, if it puts a skin in the game, if it makes a prediction, could be tested, right? So why can't string theorists test themselves? Or why can't, even cosmic inflation, that's another model that, one of the inventors from MIT, Alan Guth, argues that it's not falsifiable. My point is, a theory that cannot be falsified is not helpful because it means that you can't make progress. You cannot improve your understanding of nature. The only way for us to learn about nature is by making hypotheses that are testable, doing the experiments and learning whether we are correct or not.